I've been teaching guitar here in Vancouver for over 13 years now, and I have taught all the solos from all the bands that you could think of, from the 1950s, the 60s, the 70s, the 90s. Not so much from the 80s for some reason. I don't know why, they just don't get requested as often. But from all those solos that I have taught and learned to play myself, it's interesting that all those players tend to bend notes in the same place. I started wondering why that is, and I started looking at all those different solos, and I found that those particular notes resolve so good against the chords underneath. They're all there in those pentatonic shapes that we know, and if we just memorize where they are, then we could use them whenever we want. Without contest, the most common bend in all of classic rock is this one. That one is in so many songs we couldn't possibly count. And why is that? I think it's for two reasons. One, it's there in our easy pentatonic shape, and it sits under our third finger. It's just easy to play, right? It's on the G string, which is not too hard to push up. Sounds good. It's got a good thick sound because it's still a pretty thick string. But the second reason is because that note bends to a particular pitch. So what is that note? Let's say we're playing a blues in A. That note is a D, which means it's the fourth note of the key of A. A, B, C sharp, D. It's going to sound like this. It's actually kind of cool, but it doesn't resolve. Now, if we push that note up, that D note becomes an E. And what does that mean? That means it resolves beautifully with the A chord. Because an E note is in an A chord. It's the fifth of an A chord. An A chord is A, C sharp, E. So when we push that note up, it goes from a slightly dissonant note to a note that resolves against that chord. I could use that bend over and over again. I could use that bend as the only feature in an entire 12-bar blues because it just sounds that good. There's a very simple solo using barely any notes featuring that bend over and over. And the thing about that note is that not only can it bend to the fifth, like we said, but it can also bend to the blue note. So what do I mean by that? Remember that we have a blue note in easy shape here. We have one right there on the 8th fret of the G string. And so that means that if we bend that note just a half step, we get the sound of that blue note. So now we have two pitches that we can bend that note to. And maybe that's why it's so common, right? We can bend it up to the fifth, where it resolves, or we can bend it to the blue note, where it definitely does not resolve. Let's hear a combination of bending it to the fifth and bending it to the blue note. Here's to the fifth. Let's do one more on the fifth. Listen for that to resolve against the chords. Now, the blue note. Definitely does not resolve, right? We don't want it to. Back to the fifth. It does resolve. Fifth. All the concepts in this video come straight from my book called Guitar Soloing Like a Pro, which is available on Amazon. And we're gonna have a lot of the tabs from this video in our Patreon group, so if you haven't checked that out, hope to see you there. Now let's move to a different note, what I think is the next most common note to bend in easy shape pentatonic. Probably the next most common note to bend ever, really. And if we're thinking easy shape, it's going to be right here on the B string, in this case, A minor pentatonic, B string, 8th fret. And why is that such a popular note to bend? I think it's the same reasons, basically. It ends up being under our third finger quite comfortably. Now, sure, sometimes we might use a pinky to play that note, but I'm not likely to use a pinky to bend that note. I want the strength of my third finger plus maybe some other guys to back them up, right? But also, it's because of the pitch of that note, right? So let's analyze it. What is that note? Well, if you're quick at your notes on the B string, which most of my students are not yet, but that note is a G. And if we bend a G a whole step up, we get an A. And that's the root of the key. So this note is going to resolve really nicely. It's going to sound especially good resolving with the A chord. So let's try some of those. I'll combine those bends with some of the others. You can hear how it fits. Let's do some of those other ones. It's important to remember that this particular note, the G, bending to the A, it should not be bent a half step. It's not going to sound good, especially not in this context, right? So in this case, we've got just the one option. We just bend it one whole step and we're good. Now we've got two more of the most common notes to bend, and you're starting to see a pattern here, right? Most of these notes happen to be under our third finger. It's probably no coincidence, right? But like I said, it also just happens that they bend to a very important note that harmonizes in the key. So here's the next one. It's 8th fret of the high E string. Yeah, again, third finger bend, right? Easy. But again, what is the note? In this case, it's a C note, and we're bending it up to a D note. Well, what's the significance of that? It's actually not that great on an A chord. It's not bad. It's going to sound good on any of these bluesy chords. D is not in an A chord, but D is the 4 chord. It's the root of the 4 chord, right? If we calculate in the key of A is 1, A, B, C sharp, D. D is the 4 chord. So in a blues form, we have D chords. In most songs, we would have a 4 chord. So we can use that bend whenever, but we can especially use that bend when we're on the D chord. That's where it's going to resolve nice. So where do we have a D chord? In a 12-bar blues, typically the first 4 bars are A, and then bars 5 and 6 are D, the 4 chord. So I'm going to play some of the previous bends, but then when we get to bar 5, I'm going to do that high up bend, and you'll hear how it resolves with that D chord underneath. we're back on an A. Can hit those notes together. My bend and touch. Got one more bend to do for this video, and in our Patreon I'm going to have some extra practice tips and where to find the important bends in other pentatonic shapes, like in shape 4, what I call funny B string shape. So here's the last bend for this video. Remember that we have the extension shape at the top of our easy shape minor pentatonic, as I call it, right? Shape 1, what I call easy shape, is here. And the next shape up is what I call extension shape. Some people call it the box, some people call it the house of blues. Call it what you want. It's this little shape here. And that's where our next most common bend is. It's at the top of that shape. It's the 10th fret of the high E string. And what note am I bending there? I'm bending a D to an E. Interesting, D to E. That brings us full circle because the original bend we talked about today was D to E. That G string, 7th fret, is a D bending to the pitch of an E. And now we're on the same notes up an octave in a different pentatonic shape, much higher up. But the effect is the same. We're bending the 4th of the scale, a D note, to the sound of the 5th of the scale, an E note. And the 5ths are good because the 5ths resolve really nicely against the chords. But what that actually means then is, remember we had 2 different options for bending this note down here. We could bend it a whole step, and we could bend it a half step. That means we can do the same up here because it's the same note up an octave, right? We do have a blue note right here. It's a half step above that note. So fantastic, it's great news. We can bend it a whole step or a half step. We've got a lot of bends now. We've got these ones, whole step, half step. We've got the B string ones, whole step. We've got the high E string one at the 8th fret, whole step. That one works especially well over the 4 chord. And we have the octave up of the first one, whole step or half step. Let's hear a combination of a whole bunch of them. Bit of a wild vibrato. Now remember, this one's good for D, right? If you're looking for more tips on how to improve your soloing, I'm going to put a video right here on the screen for you from our channel. And don't forget, we also have our book called Guitar Soloing Like a Pro, which is available on Amazon. And in our Patreon group, we got all kinds of tabs, practice tips, jam tracks that are only for our members. So I hope to see you there. The links to all those are below.